Eudaimanya, systems and frameworks to improve habits, mind, and life.
Welcome to Eudaimanya. Today we are exploring the book Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel Heller.
Have you ever wondered why incredibly smart, capable, resourceful people can just completely lose their minds the moment they fall in love? I mean, we all know someone, and hey, maybe it's even been you, who handles crazy work projects or huge life crises with absolute grace, but then turns into a bundle of pure anxiety over one unanswered text message. The book introduces us to a woman named Tamara to illustrate this exact super common human problem. Tamara is sharp, she's successful, and totally independent. But then she meets Greg.
At first, everything seems absolutely perfect. As Tamara explains in the book, he was incredibly handsome, but what seduced me most were his words and the unspoken promise of a common future. The promise that someone was taking care of me. You know, that universal desire for connection is just so deeply human. But soon enough, Greg starts sending profoundly mixed signals. He says he cares, but then he pulls away. He makes plans and then cancels them. And Tamara, this brilliant, resilient woman, she becomes completely obsessed. She stops seeing friends, her work takes a hit, and she analyzes his every single move, totally unable to just walk away. Now, the common advice here is usually to tell Tamara she has weak character, or she loves too much, or she just needs to be more independent. But Levine and Heller, they propose something entirely different.
Let's get into the biology of attachments and the evolutionary truth behind our need for love.
Okay, let's really dive into this because the authors argue that Tamara's reaction is not a personality flaw. It's not a sign of weakness. It's actually a matter of hardwired biology. The book explains that to understand our romantic lives, we have to completely rethink our modern obsession with utter independence. According to the book, the pioneering psychoanalyst John Bowlby discovered that we are genetically wired to depend on a significant other. It's a biological fact. Throughout human evolution, forming a physiological unit with a partner was a critical survival advantage. Think about it. In prehistoric times, humans who wandered off alone without someone looking out for them usually ended up as somebody's lunch. Those who had someone heavily invested in their well-being survived to pass on their genes. So this deeply ingrained need for a partner, it isn't some modern emotional failing. It is literally how our ancestors survived.
And this brings us to a really core concept the authors explain, the attachment system. This isn't just a metaphor. It's an actual biological mechanism in our brains. Its sole job is to track and monitor the safety and availability of our loved ones. If the brain senses that our partner is emotionally or physically distant, it doesn't just register as a bummer. No, to our evolutionary brain, it registers as a literal life-or-death threat to our survival.
And this brilliantly illustrates why we act so crazy when we feel disconnected from someone we love. When our connection is threatened, our attachment system goes into absolute overdrive, triggering what the authors call protest behavior. The book gives a really visceral example. Imagine your partner is on a flight, and you hear a news report about a plane crash on their exact route. What do? You don't just sit back calmly, right? You frantically call the airline, you panic, your stomach completely drops. You will do literally anything to reestablish proximity to them. That is protest behavior. And while a plane crash is obviously an extreme physical threat, our brain reacts the exact same way to an emotional withdrawal from our partner.
Seeking closeness, the anxious attachment style.
So, this brings us to how different people manage this biological mechanism. Because evolution loves variety to ensure survival in different environments, the book outlines 3 distinct attachment styles. Let's look at the first one, which perfectly explains Tamara's painful experience. The human problem here is that agonizing feeling that a relationship is constantly on the verge of collapsing. You know, you might obsessively analyze a tiny shift in your partner's tone of voice, or completely panic when they take too long to reply to a text. The authors define this as the anxious attachment style. People with this style have a highly sensitive attachment system. When they sense distance, their brain relies on what the book calls activating strategies. These are intense thoughts and feelings that urgently compel them to get close to their partner again. So their fear of abandonment isn't them just being dramatic, it's simply a hyperactive survival mechanism doing exactly what it was built to do.
These activating strategies show up super clearly in daily life. Anxious individuals tend to put their partners up on a massive pedestal while completely underestimating themselves. They often rely heavily on those protest behaviors we talked about, like keeping score, withdrawing just to see if the partner even notices, or maybe even trying to make them jealous, all just to get a reaction that proves the partner actually cares.
But the biggest tragedy, the book notes, is that anxious people often mistake this exhausting emotional roller coaster, the severe anxiety, and then the massive relief that follows, for true romantic passion. They literally equate a constantly activated attachment system with being in love.
Fleeing intimacy, the avoidant attachment style.
Now, let's see how this builds into the complete opposite evolutionary strategy. Because what if your survival strategy isn't to cling tightly, but to remain completely self-reliant so you aren't tied down if danger strikes? The human error here is viewing emotional intimacy as a cage. Have you ever dated someone who seemed to genuinely like you, but the closer you got, the more they pulled away, claiming they felt suffocated? The book categorizes this as the avoidant attachment style. Just like the anxious person, the avoidant person has an attachment system, but they manage it using deactivating strategies. When things get a bit too intimate, their brain subconsciously suppresses those attachment needs and actively pushes the partner away just to reclaim a sense of total independence.
Avoidant individuals use a whole toolkit of these deactivating strategies to keep people at a safe emotional distance. And this is exactly what Greg was doing to Tamara. They send confusing mixed signals. They might yearn for an idealized phantom ex, a perfect past partner who they somehow couldn't be with, as a way to secretly devalue the perfectly good person sitting right in front of them. When their partner gets upset, they ignore the distress or just label them as too needy. Ultimately, the book points out, they make the profound mistake of confusing emotional self-reliance with true, healthy independence.
The collision, the anxious-avoidant trap.
So we have the anxious style, seeking constant closeness, and the avoidant style, seeking constant distance. What happens when these two actually meet? Well, the book explores this as one of the most painful, yet incredibly magnetic dynamics in modern dating. Levine and Heller call this the anxious-avoidant trap. It is a toxic, self-reinforcing cycle, mainly because both partners perfectly trigger each other's deepest evolutionary insecurities. The anxious partner perceives any sort of distance as a life-threatening danger, right? So they demand more closeness to feel secure. But the avoidant partner perceives those exact demands for closeness as a huge threat to their autonomy, so they withdraw even further to feel safe. The more the avoidant pulls away, the more the anxious chases. The more the anxious chases, the more the avoidant runs. It creates this highly dramatic, totally unstable environment.
And this is just a terrible place to be. As the authors write, a constantly activated attachment system is exactly the opposite of what nature had in mind for us in terms of fulfilling love. Staying in this trap is biologically exhausting. It completely drains your focus, your health, and your overall happiness, which is exactly like what we saw with Tamara losing her ability to even function at work.
Building a secure base, the secure attachment style.
Thankfully, there is a third way. The book notes that roughly 50% of the population actually falls into this final category. This is the style that allows us to truly thrive. This is the secure attachment style. The beauty of secure individuals is that they instinctively know how to decode emotional signals, and they respond to them reliably. They just don't play games. Because they are comfortable with intimacy and aren't terrified of losing their independence, they act as a physical buffer. The book details how a secure partner's consistency and warmth can actually rewire and calm an anxious partner's nervous system. Literally, just by being reliable, they turn down the alarm bells in their partner's brain.
Secure people just operate differently day to day. They are consistently available. If they say they're going to call, they call. They communicate their needs clearly instead of hoping you'll somehow read their mind. Crucially, the authors highlight that secure partners take genuine responsibility for their partner's well-being. When there is a conflict, they deal with the specific issue at hand directly. They don't generalize, they don't attack your character, and they certainly don't threaten to end the whole relationship over a disagreement. They naturally create a safe environment that allows both partners to just flourish. So, the crucial point is, if we summarize the book, we have 3 distinct styles. And as the authors heavily emphasize, none of these are pathological. They are simply different evolutionary programming. The secure style is comfortable with intimacy and communicates directly. The anxious style craves intimacy deeply, fears losing it, and triggers protest behaviors. And the avoidant style feels suffocated by intimacy and relies on deactivating strategies to push it away. The ultimate takeaway from Levine and Heller's work is that acknowledging that our attachment needs are valid is the very first step to finding happiness. You are not weak for needing someone. A partnership that honors our intrinsic biological needs provides what the authors call a secure base. When our brains know for a fact that someone reliably has our back, our attachment system finally goes quiet. And it's in that quiet, secure space that we are empowered to take risks in our careers, grow as individuals, and actually improve our emotional and physical health.
Which leaves us with a pretty profound question from the book's philosophy to consider. If your biological need for dependency is a scientific fact and not a personal flaw, how will you choose your next partner? Or how will you show up in your current relationship? Understanding this science gives you the power to stop fighting your own biology, step out of the anxious-avoidant trap, and actively seek the secure, fulfilling love you are actually wired for. Thank you for joining us today on Eudaimanya, and we hope this explainer changes the way you look at love.
If this video was useful, give it a like, subscribe, and share. More systems and frameworks in the next Eudaimanya video.